Randall, nice to see you, and thanks so much for talking to us here on the program. So let's talk about some of the issues that happened yesterday in terms of the polling stations opening late and what was going on with that.
Yes, now we did have some hiccups in the morning, but within the first hour, most of them were resolved. Some logistics in terms of getting to the voting stations and getting all the materials in there as well. And one or two areas where we had obstacles such as protest action, etc. But we're glad to announce that I think for this election, compared to other elections, those issues were sort of minimal, and it showed a big improvement.
So are you saying in comparison to others, this went smoothly in comparison to other elections in terms of different service delivery protests, things that were hampering you along the line?
Well, we obviously strive for 100%, so I won't say it went smoothly, it went better. Given the challenges.
Certainly there were some challenges, and a couple of them highlighted. One of them were technical issues, and that was with having registered voters being first scanned to go in and then manually ticked off the voters' roll. But that was a big problem, is that at one point people were saying we're offline, and that caused big delays. What was going on with the machine?
Yes, well, we had some technical issues with the machines. What we ever need to understand is that the machine is only a tool. The process involved for voting is that once a voter presents himself is to mark his name off the voter's roll, ink his thumb, issue his ballots. So what the voter management machine does for us is to provide for us the data electronically, firstly, and secondly also gives us an indication where in the voter's roll he is. Given the challenges that we've had, we've issued instructions to our stations during the day, after consulting with our political parties as well, that we just go entirely manual to ensure that the queues start moving. And during the course of the day, that was what we had implemented. And I must say, I must commend the people that have stood there in the queues and patiently, and some into the early hours of the night, to make sure that they exercise their democratic choice.
Were there any polling stations? Obviously, we know that the rules that stand are that if you're in the queue at 9 o'clock, you can vote. But if you arrive after 9 o'clock, you're turned away, because those are the timelines. Were there any people turned away that you know of in terms of timelines and people arriving late, or did you see or hear from those different stations that everybody managed to cast their votes?
Yes, correct. The process is at 9 o'clock we take a security official, in this case it would be a SABC officer, to the back of the queue, and nobody else joins the queue, and everybody in that queue is attended to, and that is the practice that was observed last night.
All right, so voting. Now, we know that it's very slow at the moment. Obviously, we're still below 1%, but actually, let me ask you this. What time did the last voting station close last night? Or this morning, I should say, because I believe it was pretty early in the morning.
Yes, it was. I think it's important that we rotate and refresh, and unfortunately, I missed that event because I just got back in, fast asleep. But I think just in terms of the results coming in, I think it's important to understand there's a process. Even though you say there's about, say, less than 1%, there's probably a little bit more that has been captured already. But before we display anything on the board, it must have satisfied 4 criteria. Firstly, the result must have been captured. Secondly, the result slip must have been scanned. And once that is done, we have auditors, independent auditors, who we also have here in the results center that must have audited it. And fourthly, there must not be any exceptions against them. Now, exceptions is parameters that we set, some obvious ones, party vote comparison across ballots, for example. And only once it has satisfied all of that, then it comes onto the board. So it's a bit of a trickle, but as we also have shift changes now of auditors as well, as our staff coming back, obviously needed a well-deserved rest, we're going to see the board trickling soon.
Good. Well, I'm happy to hear that, because it is a long counting process now. There's a long way to go. And I know we can't, it is difficult at this time to even talk about voter turnout and to talk about how South Africans turned up for these 2000, and look at us, we still got a long way to go. The 2024 elections, we don't even want to predict. But from the queues, from the amount of people that were out and about voting, Can we look at it and say this was a good turnout, or do we not even want to go there?
It is a bit early, and if we had the VMD functioning and working online, I would have been able to give you that indication now. But we obviously now have to wait and see as the results come in. And I'd probably say once we're midway, we should have an indication as far as voter turnout is concerned. But it's still too early to assess. I just look at some of the initial turnouts ranging from between 50%, 40%, one or two of them, small areas, but up to 60% in some areas. But as the results populate further, the picture will unfold.
Yeah, it certainly will. Give us some time indications. Obviously, people are resting now, and I'm sure shifts picking up again by 6 o'clock. And not to say that there isn't counting happening right now, but when you talk about midway, when you talk about things really giving us a clearer picture, are we talking today still? Can we start getting a much clearer picture by, say, midday today?
Yes, historically, Leanne, we have an extra ballot this year for national provincial election, and obviously depending on the turnout. But historically, we've had about more than 90% of results within the first 24 hours. So we hope to form that pattern still, to comply with that.
A very important question I need to ask. Any voting stations completely disrupted, that they weren't able to finish the voting process, or did all of the voting stations complete the process and properly?
Last time I checked, Leanne, we had, I think, across the country, of the approximately 23,000 voting stations, there was about 4. I don't know if they, at this stage, whether they subsequently opened, but the number was as low as 4. Obviously, this is not acceptable. Ideally, you want all of your voting stations opened, but there may have possibly be about between 2 or 4.
Historically, then what happens to those voters that were not able to, due to the fact that they were not open and they weren't able to cast their votes? What happens then?
Well, the Commission has the right to determine whether the result at a voting district is excluded, or in this case, where it had taken place. If it's not materially going to impact on the outcome of the result, then they can still declare the result.
All right, well, we'll have to wait and see for all of those issues to be brought about, because this is still the early hours where all of these results are being brought in and the issues are still coming to the fore. But thank you for talking to us, and good luck going forward. I'm glad you got some rest, because I don't think you're going to be getting too much more rest going forward. But thank you very, very much for chatting to us. So there we go. The IEC just giving us an understanding as to when a clearer picture will unfold here, but this is still very, very early days. There were some issues that were reported around the country. The long queues, some opening late, certainly some closing in the early hours of the morning. But the reality is that the majority of South Africans were able to cast their votes. But now the counting process has begun, and we'll try and keep that picture unveiling for you here on SABC News.